participants here in saying thank you for doing this. So I'm an epistemologist, which means that I am ridiculously excited about the conceptual distinction between knowledge and true belief. And it seems to me sometimes reading philosophers of mind and psychologists that my extreme level of excitement about this distinction is not always universally shared. In fact, some people are just a little bit blasé about drawing that line between knowledge and true belief. And I want to do something to sort of share my excitement or to try and suggest that in certain contexts, actually, just keeping a closer eye on that distinction can be helpful. And you might think, like, how could it help? I mean, who cares, right? Especially if you're looking a lot at the kind of tasks that are done with non-human primates or with linguistic infants. Someone has a true belief about something, they're right about something, or someone actually knows that something's the case. So, Alice has a true belief that there's cake in the basket. Bob knows that there's cake in the basket. What are they going to do? They're going to do exactly the same thing. And it's true that you can, if you hang out with epistemologists, come up with elaborate cases, especially involving sort of temporally extended action, where you can start to see differences in the anticipated behavior of somebody who has an honest true belief. For the kinds of tasks that we're looking at, we're looking at the early development of the mental state lexicon. Is there a spoon in this box? Where did that toy go? It doesn't really seem to matter behaviorally whether the agent that you're evaluating has knowledge or has a true belief. It seems to me matters some difference. And if we're just looking at what kinds of behavior people are anticipating, it can seem like it doesn't make any difference. They're going to do the same thing. And now when I start to complain that sometimes I think people start mislabeling situations of knowledge as situations of true belief. I want to be very clear that this is actually a very esoteric complaint that I'm making here, because any situation of knowledge actually is a situation of true belief. Knowing entails having a true belief. So you're not saying something that's literally false. When you take a situation that's a knowledge situation, you say that's a true belief situation. Bob knows that there's a cake in the basket. Well, he better think that there's cake in the basket, better be true. It's semantically defective to say he knows that there's cake in the basket, but there isn't any. And so there's a very close relationship between knowledge and true belief. It's entailment, but it's a one-directional entailment. It doesn't go the other way. Alice can, of course, be right at the cake in the basket, but not know. Maybe she's, wishful thinker, thinks about cake, sees that picnic basket that Bob's brought, and just becomes irrationally convinced that there's cake in it. She doesn't know that it's there, let's say, but she could be right that it's there. She could have a true belief. So it's a one-way condition. But I would say knowledge is often a better way to think about things, and it's a stronger condition. It's a condition that has very sharply limited entry conditions. There's all kinds of ways you could end up being right about something or having a true belief. I mean, from wishful thinking, from having some kind of delusion. Even paranoid people have enemies. So you can end up with a true belief in all kinds of ways. Knowing has, in both Eastern and Western epistemology from antiquity, been recognized as being a state that you can get to only in a very, very limited number of structural ways. You can attain knowledge through perception or through testimonial transmission, not just from any random person, but from someone who starts out, himself or herself, having knowledge. If you have testimonial transmission from an idiot, that doesn't require knowledge of the testified content, or from inference, but not inference from anything, inference from premises that are known. Sound inference, that's something that will give you knowledge. And if you're thinking of things from the perspective of the attributor of a mental state, who is trying to project onto the agent this invisible condition of a mental state, the state of knowing is one, because it can only be attained in a very restricted number of ways, is one that's going to be sort of easier to attribute. So there's certain outward, visible markers of what someone is perceiving. Not necessarily, there isn't necessarily a set of convenient outward visible markers of what someone is wishfully thinking or delusionally persuaded. So there's a number of sort of outward cues that indicate knowledge, and that's not necessarily what I believe. I should say something about what I take knowledge to be. And this is not my own theory, it's a theory that Timothy Williamson has influentially propounded in recent years. So Williamson starts by drawing a distinction from linguistics between factive and non-factive mental state verbs or mental state constructions, and then he imports that back into the theory of mind. So the basic idea of a factive verb is it's a verb whose sentential complement can only be true. Factive verbs select for true complements. So if you realize that your wallet has been stolen, then your wallet has been stolen. You can't notice that something is the case or register that something is the case unless it's actually a fact. You could suspect something, hope for something, or be extremely confident of something that is false. Those are all non-factive locutions. They don't select for true complements. The factive versus non-factive distinction is a distinction between the types of mental states that we can have only towards truths and the types of mental states that we can have to truths or falsehoods, perhaps indistinguishably. And you might wonder what the position is of knowledge if you look at this whole sort of factive family of verbs. What's the position of knowledge? Knowledge is the mother of all factors. It's the factor without which you wouldn't have any of the others on the list. I'm actually saying that now because my conversation with David Bieber about perhaps some difficulty motive factors like regret, which might not quite fit. But in general, it seems to be the case that if you are aware that something is the case, then you also know that it's the case. If you see that something is the case, you know that it's the case. If you register that something is the case, then you know that it's the case. Knowing is like the lowest common denominator of all factive mental state verbs, and correspondingly the attitudes of those verbs to know. So you'll see later in the talk, we'll start talking about people who talk about someone being aware that an event has happened or something like that. That is a knowledge attribution. Noticing that something has happened, that is a knowledge attribution. All of those are sort of more specific forms of knowledge. Knowing is the most general condition underpinning that. Okay, now I'm going to talk about places where I think people are focused not on my distinction, which is the distinction between factive states of mind, only born towards truth, to maybe a later and more sophisticated ability to think in terms of the non-factive, where you have a state of mind that could be born towards truths or falsehoods. I want to talk about people who are looking at things really from the perspective of true and false beliefs, rather than factive and non-factive mental states. So this is a nice kind of example. When Hyun-Jung Sung and Ray Leiterson talk about the developmental progression that they see in their two-stage group, it's a progression from reality congruent informational states, which specify accurate information, to reality incongruent ones, which specify inaccurate information. So these states really, structurally, when they're described this way, sound like true belief states, the kinds of states in which we're getting it right. And over here we have, later in development, the kinds of states where we're capable of recognizing people have misconceptions and they're getting it wrong. And you might think, well, that just covers the waterfront, right? The congruent, the incongruent, we're done. But if you think about the progression that way, there's a couple types of cases which kind of don't quite fit in this way of analyzing things, right? So one kind of case is we can attribute mental states to people sometimes. If you can attribute a belief to someone where you're neither in a position to see them as having accurate or inaccurate information, right? Somebody believes something about, the next thing that Bernie Sanders is going to do, and I don't know if it's accurate or inaccurate what the belief is about Bernie, but I can certainly attribute the belief even if I'm agnostic on the content. More deeply, there's something about factive verbs which I forgot to tell you, something special about them that distinguishes them from the non-factive, which is that while right here I have these factive verbs embedding sentential complements, that something is the that the toy is in the box. That's not the only kind of complement that factive verbs can embed. They can also embed questions. So you can know where the toy is. You can realize that the spoon is in the box. But you can also realize what is in the box. You can notice who came to the party last night. So you can embed questions under factives, and you can't do that with non-factives. Non-factives do not embed questions. You can't think who is there or believe where the box is. That doesn't really make sense in the same way. So another kind of mental state you can attribute to somebody else is you can attribute to them knowledge of where something is, even if you yourself don't have a belief about the location of the item. So that kind of attribution of knowledge where or knowledge what is in a container, that is an attribution which is not nicely mapped onto this kind of way of carving out the conceptual space here. Because you're not specifying what accurate information the other party has. I'm not specifying that the person believes that the toy is now in the yellow box. What I'm attributing to them is that they know where the toy is, even if I'm unable to specify that propositional complement myself. Okay, so when I say Weier's sort of carving things up in a sort of you get it right or you get it wrong way, and I want to carve things up like you have a factive state which could apply only to truths versus a state which could apply either to falsehoods or truths. This is consistent with her general program, which is of course a fantastic program of looking at the contrasting conditions in terms of belief. So she labels the two sides of her unexpected transport paradigm as a true belief condition and a false belief condition. Not as a knowledge condition and a false belief condition, which I think might be ultimately the way we want to talk about that distinction. It's not just Onishi and Weier's. There's a sort of broader tendency, especially among people who think that the concept of belief is either very early developing or innate. There's a broader tendency to think in terms of belief and true belief as a thing that stands in natural contrast to false belief. So here's Leslie saying, when he's trying to explain why the capacity for explicit false attribution develops late, he's doing that by appealing to what he sees as a prepotent response to see the other as having a true belief. So having representation, now I would say representation which could inherently be either true or false, but which in this case happens to be true. And that's something that he thinks is motivated by the sort of background statistical assumption that most of the time people's beliefs are true. So that's how he's thinking of the default. The default is a true belief condition, contrasted later with a false belief condition. So I know there's many theories of the age at which full-blown belief attribution emerges. You can have two state views, you can have two system views. You can have views where people are actually very skeptical about early apparent success on implicit false belief attribution tasks. But I want to say there's actually, no matter when it is that full-blown belief attribution emerges, there's actually a sort of common problem that all of these views face, and it's a problem that can be helped to some extent by taking a sharper focus on the contrast between knowledge and true belief. So it goes like this. Look, even if you took, like just to take an extreme case, even if you suppose that infants come into the world already pre-equipped with the concept of belief, there's no question of them having to learn that structure, learn the very idea of an informational state which may or may not be in accordance with other reality. Even if they're prepackaged with that state, they don't come into the world already having mastery over the contents of particular beliefs that are to be attributed to particular agents. They see the handshake reaching for the apple, and for us as adults, of course, it's natural, instinctive, and automatic to see the agent attached to that hand as wanting the apple and knowing that it's there, and or believing that it's there. But if you think of this from the perspective of the developing mind reader, it's actually a very interesting and difficult task to flesh in the contents that get attached to these states, even if the structure of the state is given to us innately. And in particular, if you think about those sort of classic unexpected transfer cases, it's useful to focus very hard on the question of how it is that the novice mind reader gets the quote-unquote right answer to the task. How is it that state of belief gets computed by the infant? And the answer, sort of unsurprisingly, I think, is that the natural misconception that the infant has to attribute to the agent is, in these pre-linguistic tasks, is always a function of earlier attributed knowledge. And I really mean knowledge there. I don't mean true belief. That is, when you're going through the initial stages of the trial of the experiment, it can be an open question for you whether the agent that the infant is witnessing does or does not have a representation of the scene which is accurate. In order to pass the test at the end, you have to start by making it some kind of law that the agent that you are witnessing has a conception of the scene that matches the way the scene actually is, has a factive state of mind that can only be getting it right. That's the way you have to think in order ultimately to pass the test. I mean, especially if you're thinking about the generalizations that the infant is making are going to be based on cues about the orientation of the person to the scene. And this is true both for perception and for inference tasks. It's also true for testimony tasks, but I don't have time for that. So if you look at the unexpected transfer task, you start with the very thing that was initially known. That very same proposition later becomes embedded under a mere thinks that operator. As the world changes, it's no longer the case that the agent is in a state of mind which necessarily aligns with reality. If you look at the unexpected contents task, it's a bit trickier because it never need have been the case that the agent knew the contents of that particular token box. But the unexpected contents task is really a task of whether the infant or toddler is in a position to see the agent as executing an inference from premises that are known. The infant had better see the agent as knowing that this is a box of a certain kind. You know, there's unobstructed perceptual access there, and had better attribute to that agent, if he's going to pass the test, knowledge of the type of box that it is, and background knowledge of what it contains, in order to produce a successful inference. And I want to sort of actually emphasize now that this is at some level very much recognized in the literature. So if you look at the way people write this up, people are very sympathetic to very early developing or innate concepts of belief. You'll see when they're describing, oh yes, we're talking about true belief scenarios versus false belief scenarios. The difference between the true belief and the false belief scenarios is that the protagonist knew at the end of the trial sequence where the object was located, right? And if you as an experimenter have to sort of cash out, well, here's what true belief scenarios are like. There's scenarios where someone knows something, right? Then you might want to sort of emphasize that your infant who's watching this protocol unfold may actually herself also be conceiving of this as a scenario which involves knowledge, not necessarily a scenario which involves belief that happens to be true. So also with the unexpected contents task, you see when you're fleshing it out, you say that's actually a knowledge condition, and that's significant. And you see some sort of similar patterns when you look at other ways of thinking about the early development of meta-state attribution. So you see this actually even in people who don't think that there's an innate concept of belief that's operative in enabling infants to pass those implicit false belief attribution tests. So you have Ackerley and Butterfield thinking that maybe what infants are working with is something like a belief-like notion of registration, which is encoding patterns of agents and objects. Or Kerner has what he himself describes as a fairly similar notion of an experiential record. And when Kerner describes at a higher level of abstraction both his own notion of experiential record and Ackerley's notion of registration, you'll notice that both of these descriptions are really larded with those factive terms. Both of those notions are based on distinguishing events that an agent has registered, encountered, witnessed, or seen. Those are all, factive success locutions. And that is something that Kerner's willing to say is actually coming very close to being a genuine meta-state attribution. The thing that's kind of interesting here is it comes close to being treated as a belief, he says. That's not, there's maybe something potentially a little bit misleading in that, because what it is in the first instance is it looks like the infant is attributing some kind of knowledge of the objects, is attributing a state in which the agent had to have picked up on what those facts of the situation actually were. Maybe that later gets diluted to a belief-like state. You see it in Carruthers as well. So Carruthers, when he's criticizing Ackerley's view, says Ackerley has no good grounds to deny the capacity of the infant to attribute propositional thought to another. So Carruthers says, infants can have propositional thoughts from the outset, and because of that, one of the capacities that they should have is they should be able to use whatever proposition they have used to conceptualize the situation seen by the target agent, which is itself going to be a proposition which reflects how things actually are in the shared reality that the infant and the agent inhabit, and embed that proposition into the scope of a thinks that operator. The thing is, a thinks that operator in its full generality doesn't just take true propositions as input. It can take true and false propositions as input. The kind of operator that takes only true propositions as input is a knows that operator. So if this is how infants are getting started, they're getting started by knowledge attribution. They're not getting started by attribution of mere states of belief, which are then sorted out into true belief and false belief. So one of the things we're all trying to do, whether we're working with innate primitives or whether we're working with conceptual resources that are acquired later through the process of learning, is we're trying to figure out the recipe or program for how they slot together. The concept of thinking that something is the case and the concept of knowing that something is the case are intimately related, and we want to see how they work together. So you have somebody like Carruthers say, well, how does it get going? How does it start? Maybe the infant starts by looking at the agent and saying, the agent is aware of the toy going into the box, right? So he's got a situation in which the infant starts with a knowledge attribution, which is what always happens in these primitivistic tests. And then what the infant does is the infant computes and thereafter remembers that the agent thinks that the toy is in the box. And I like this, but there's a little bit of a problem with it. I like it because knowing that something is the case really does entail that you also think that it's the case. So I'm happy with having that computation being executed automatically. What is interesting to me is if we have this thereafter remembers, you have to remember it, even if your vision is occluded for a moment and there's some hanky-panky and things to the ground. But you don't want the meta-state attributor to be remembering it sort of the dominance of knowledge attribution over belief attribution. So you may start by seeing an agent initially as knowing that something is the case. And I've argued all those implicit false belief attribution tasks have to start with an initial knowledge attribution. You can then automatically transition at whatever age you become conceptually capable of doing that to see the agent as believing that that very same thing is the case. Interestingly, you can also see them as knowing the answer to a question, like knowing where the ball is. That is something that you could do simultaneously. Then you could have them retaining the belief even as the ball moves, but only if they stop knowing the location of the ball, having this knowledge where there's an embedded question there. So the idea is that beliefs get retained after they're acquired only if you either continue to know that they're the case, or if when they cease to be the case, you also simultaneously are ignorant of that fact. So your knowledge of the question that's being answered is included. So there's two big standing assumptions that get exploited by instinctive false belief attribution on this picture. One is that informational states linger. That once somebody knows that something's the case, they go on believing it, even through obstructions in their vision. The other is that informational states are productive, that they support inference. That's the kind of assumption that gets exploited in the